Which camera is better for video, the iPhone 13 Pro Max or the GoPro Hero 10? If you're looking to start vlogging or shooting YouTube videos, are these cameras worth using and worth buying? And which one is just better for video? Well, I'm gonna share with you my opinion, but I'm also gonna show you some side-by-side footage so that you can decide for yourself. Coming up.
You gotta just press record.
Hey guys, it's Nolan with Think Media. Now I want you to look at this side-by-side footage and let me know which camera do you think is the iPhone and which one do you think is the GoPro. One of these cameras is the iPhone 13 Pro Max on the ultra wide lens shooting in 4K 24 frames per second, and the other is the GoPro Hero 10 shooting in 5.3K at 24 frames per second. On the iPhone, I'm shooting everything inside of the camera app, and for my format, I'm just shooting in high efficiency. I am not shooting in Apple ProRes because that just takes up way too much space. On the GoPro, I'm using the wide lens right here, and sometimes I do use the linear lens with horizon leveling, but I'll make sure to tell you when I do that. I also have hyper smooth set to high, bitrate set to high, and then for sharpness, I am using low, and I'm using a flat picture profile and then color grading it in post. Now, if you've watched any of my GoPro videos, I'm basically using the cinematic settings because I want to get the best footage out of this as possible. Now, I did shoot some video on the natural color profile, but it's just so contrasty, and so I really prefer shooting in flat and then color grading it later. And really my thought process was that the GoPro is half the amount of money that it costs to buy a new iPhone. And so I wanted to make this thing look as good as possible to give it the best fighting chance to stand against the new iPhone. Now I'm about to reveal which camera was which, so make sure your comment is placed. You have about 2 seconds and now you can see which camera was which. Honestly, these cameras are completely different. I'm gonna cover the most important differences between these two cameras coming up. But before we dive into that, I think it's super important that you understand who these cameras were actually made for. Now, when it comes to the GoPro, this camera definitely has the edge when it comes to durability. This thing is going to be waterproof. You can throw this thing around, you can strap it to your head, you can strap it anywhere, take it bungee jumping, cliff diving, do whatever you want to do with this camera. This thing is an absolute beast, especially for those action, sports, adventure types of people. As far as the iPhone goes, you are not going to want to strap this to your head and then go skydiving. This thing was not made for that. But if you are someone who's looking to just do some vlogging or make YouTube videos with these two cameras, well, they're both great options, but there are some differences, so let's jump right into that. Now, as far as the colors go, honestly, I think they both look really good, but something that I found with the automatic white balance was that the GoPro tended to lean a bit more warm. Whereas on the iPhone, I found that the automatic white balance did a better job and it just looked more natural right out the gate. Now, one major weakness that I found in the colors of the GoPro when I was reviewing this camera last year was the sky had a bunch of noise in it. Now, even after updating the GoPro to the latest firmware, I found that this issue still happens, and in the blue sky, you're still getting a lot of noise, whereas on the iPhone, you get a very clean image in that blue sky. Now, with both of these cameras on the extreme wide angle, you're not really gonna get a blurry background on either of these cameras. However, I did find that on the iPhone, if you use the wide lens, not the ultra wide lens, you can get a blurry background with that camera. And that's one of the pros of the iPhone versus the GoPro is you have those 3 cameras on the back of the phone, and then of course you have that front facing camera. And when you use that wide angle lens and the telephoto lens, you can get a really nice shot, and there's just so much more versatility with the iPhone when shooting video versus the GoPro. If you're gonna zoom in at all or crop in, it's all gonna be digital, so you're gonna lose some of the quality there. But the GoPro does have more resolution than the iPhone. So the GoPro can shoot in 5.3K up to 60 frames per second, whereas the iPhone can only shoot at 4K. Side by side, I definitely do prefer the sharpness that the GoPro gives you, whereas the iPhone looks over sharpened. The GoPro is sharp, but it's not over sharpened. And I turned the sharpness down to low because I'd like to add this in post. So I like on the GoPro that there's a lot of detail there without it being over sharpened. However, you might like that sharpened look on the iPhone versus the GoPro. It's really all preference. And so as I'm talking about this stuff, I'm gonna give you my opinions, but at the end of the day, it's what you prefer and it's what you think looks good. Since I mentioned those 3 cameras, another thing to talk about with that ultra wide angle lens on the phone is you have a macro mode. Because it has autofocus, you can get really close to certain subjects and get some really cool macro shots with the iPhone. Now the GoPro 5.3K at 60 frames per second versus the iPhone 4K 60 frames per second, to me, both look really, really good. However, on the GoPro, you can shoot 120 frames per second in 4K. And when you compare this to the 1080, 120 frames per second on the iPhone, the GoPro looks way better than the iPhone. As far as battery life goes, the iPhone lasted way longer than the GoPro. I had to bring a few extra spare batteries to shoot on the GoPro, whereas my iPhone lasted me all day long. Lastly, I wanted to test the low light on the GoPro versus the iPhone. and the results were just ridiculous. The GoPro had way more noise than the iPhone using that ultra wide lens on the iPhone, and the GoPro really was just unusable. Now, part of this might be because my wall is blue, and there were some issues that I noticed with the blue and with noise. However, the GoPro really was unusable, whereas the iPhone just looked a lot better. And the cool thing about the iPhone is if you change from the ultra wide angle lens to the wide lens, you actually get way more light going into the camera and you get a much better image. Looking at these shots side by side is so crazy to see how clean the iPhone can be when compared to the GoPro in this low light situation. As far as audio goes, I had a hard time deciding which one I liked better, but I did two different tests. So first up is a wind test. Take a listen to that right now. It's really windy right now, but this is the GoPro Hero 10 right here. And this is the iPhone 13 Pro Max. How does it sound in the wind? I'm curious to know which one actually performs better in the wind. I don't think either one's gonna do too well in this wind, but we'll see which one sounds a little bit better. To me, I think the iPhone sounded better in this wind test versus the GoPro, but also realize that the microphones are placed in different spots on these two cameras. So this test could be skewed, but I just found that overall in the windy environments, I usually had better sounding audio coming out of my iPhone versus my GoPro. Now take a listen to what these mics sound like when there's not crazy wind happening. This is what the GoPro Hero 10 sounds like outside when there's no wind coming into the camera. And this is what the iPhone 13 Pro Max sounds like when there's no wind coming into the camera. Now, both of these cameras do have the ability to hook up an external microphone, so you can get some really good audio from getting a shotgun mic or something like a lavalier microphone into these cameras. But this is a great test for the person who's just starting out and doesn't have the money to go and buy an external microphone just yet. So does the GoPro sound better or does the iPhone sound better? In this test, I actually kind of found the GoPro to sound a little bit better to me, but this just might be preference. Let me know which one you guys think sounds better. But honestly, both of them sound good and I would use either of them for my YouTube video. Both the cameras do have great stabilization, but the edge does go to the GoPro. You have more options and that hyper smooth really is super smooth. It almost looks like a gimbal sometimes if you're walking. It just looks incredibly smooth. However, on the iPhone, if you do hold it still enough, you can get some really good looking shots with that camera as well. But the winner for stabilization definitely does go to the GoPro. Now, something that really surprised me is when I took all the footage and I put it on my computer, the GoPro file size was 3 times more than my iPhone file sizes. Now, yes, you are getting more resolution on this camera. I had the bitrate set to high. You could change some of those things, but 3 times as much storage for this camera, it just gives me another reason to grab my iPhone instead of the GoPro when shooting videos. Now, again, there's some major differences on who these cameras were actually made for. For me, I'm picking up the iPhone 95% of the time versus the GoPro because I have both of them. Now, the 5% of the time that I would use the GoPro is if I was getting it wet or attaching it to my head, getting some sort of first person point of view shot. And I don't get those types of shots a lot. That's why I really only use this thing about 5% of the time when I'm using my iPhone 95% of the time. I like the image of the iPhone better than the GoPro, and you have the versatility with those 3 different lenses, and it's so much more easy to use than the GoPro. The touchscreen is obviously much bigger and just works a lot better than the tiny screen on the GoPro. Now, I'm not bashing the GoPro. This is a fantastic camera for the price, and my iPhone is much more expensive than the GoPro. Overall, both of these cameras do have great quality, and you can use them in so many different ways, and so they're both great options. However, if you are someone who has the iPhone 13 or maybe the iPhone 12, do you need to buy the GoPro if you're not doing action sports? No, you don't really need to buy it. But if you don't have an iPhone or you don't have a GoPro and you're looking to buy one, well, this one is much cheaper, and in good lighting, you're gonna get a really good image out of this camera. Now, one of the key strengths with the GoPro versus the iPhone is when you use the GoPro and you're vlogging with this, you have this front-facing screen so you can monitor yourself. But when I was using the back camera on the iPhone, I actually hooked my Apple Watch up to it so I could monitor myself. But if you want to use each of these cameras in the most convenient way, what you'd wanna do is shoot in the natural color profile. That way you don't have to color grade anything. You can literally just throw it on YouTube and it looks pretty good. And on the iPhone, you can just use the front facing screen and vlog that way. That way you can monitor yourself, make sure you're in the shot. And that's gonna be the most convenient way to use each of these cameras. So I wanna show you a side-by-side of the front facing screen on the iPhone versus the GoPro with the natural color profile. And so side-by-side, this is what they both look like. Which one do you guys like better, the GoPro Hero 10, or do you like the front facing camera on the iPhone 13 Pro Max? This is a 4K image and we're comparing it to the 5.3K on the GoPro Hero 10, but really, which one do you guys like better? Now looking at these side by side, one of the things that I love about the iPhone is the dynamic range. So right now you can still see me, and on the GoPro, I'm really dark. It's a lot more contrasty, but the HDR footage on the iPhone 13 Pro gives you those beautiful colors in the background, but also retains all that information in the shadows. So you're getting the highlights and the shadows all properly exposed. Whereas on the iPhone 13, it just doesn't do as good of a job because it doesn't have that HDR option. You're just getting that regular footage that you get on a normal camera. So the iPhone, as far as dynamic range goes, does have a major edge over the GoPro in this test. Let me know in the comments which camera you would rather have for your YouTube videos. For me, I prefer using the iPhone versus the GoPro, even though I got to admit the GoPro is so nice to use for certain shots. I just prefer using the iPhone for most of my stuff. Now for one of my Think Media videos, I actually replaced my nice Sony camera with this iPhone 13 Pro Max, and it looked really, really good. So you can click on the screen and I show you exactly how to get high quality videos out of your iPhone. So click on the screen and I'll see you guys in the next video.